foundational myths of the United States that it's the nation of immigrants. That's not true. There were people here, but the United States was founded on their backs. There were people who were conquered and incorporated into the United States. There were people who were imported into the United States, either as slaves or as indentured servants or other things. That's not immigration. That's imperialism exerting its will, and that continues to go on. For example, I teach, I've taught, I should say, English is a second language here in Los Angeles for 30 years, and one of the things we studied was the question of remittances. Remittances is people in this country sending money back to people and their families in the countries that they came from. And every year, poor Mexicanos in the United States send $15 billion and more to poorer Mexicanos in Mexico. And the same is true for the Philippines and every country in Central America, many countries in the East. And my students asked me when we studied this, well, teacher, for sending so much money, why is everybody still so poor? And I said, that's the fundamental question, because the remittances is the largest flow of capital from the north to the south. It's poor people in the United States sending money back to their relatives and families, sending money home to build a house when they retire, etc., dwarfs the amount of money not only in foreign aid but in private capital investment in the third world. The difference is that the private capital investment results in the much larger flow of money coming from the south to the north. And the fundamental basis of, as we say, privilege and the bribe, the imperial bribe, and what has distorted working classes around the world. And if you look at the British, for example, Marx and Engels talked about the bourgeoisification of the British proletariat because of the conquest just of Ireland. Forget the rest of the world. So that fundamental phenomenon distorts every society on the face of the earth. There's a book, How the Irish Became White. But the fundamental way the Irish became white was not only here, it was in Ireland as well, because they had the safety valve. And I don't know if people listened to the show a couple of days ago on Democracy Now!, but they were talking about the impact of the imperial wars in Central America, the Caribbean, and Latin America on the population of the United States, but also on those countries. And so the United States consciously brought to the United States both rebels when there were rebellions and reactionaries when there were successful revolutions in this country as a safety valve on those countries. So my father came here from Poland, and many other people duplicated that response, and that had an effect on Poland and on all the struggles of the working people in Europe, because the land that was stole from native people here was available. Because some of the histories of struggle in the Irish when they came to America as indentured servants, but the reason you come as an indentured servant is because when you get out of your indenture, there was land to be had for the taking, quote unquote. Whose land was it? It was the land of the indigenous people. And so, for example, in Pennsylvania, there was a uprising by predominantly Irish against the Quaker regime and Benjamin Franklin, those people that ran Pennsylvania, because they had reached an agreement with the indigenous people living in Pennsylvania to respect most of their land. And the Irish said, no, we want that land, we want to have farms. And the same thing, if you look at Bacon's Rebellion, people look at all the time about the history of, class struggle in America, but Bacon's Rebellion, again, was led by a small planter and incorporated even some slaves, but white indentured servants who wanted land. They wanted the native land, they wanted to break the treaties that existed. If you look at the Declaration of Independence, one of their key grievances against the King of England was that he was treating with the merciless savages. All the colonies, this is one of the few countries, and Israel's the other, that has no defined border. All the colonies that were settled by the British on the eastern seaboard claimed the land as far as they could steal it. And so when the King of England said, no, we're going to stop you here at the Alleghenies and we're going to respect the land that the indigenous people have, that was casus belli. That was the reason they wanted to have a war and get independence from England so they could claim that land, they could control the slave population of Greenwich Village. So that has an effect when people talk about consciousness and identity and all those things. You have to deal with that. When people talk about the question of weapons in the United States, why is the United States so armed, way out of comparison to any other society on this earth, unless you go to some of the recent situations in Africa and the Middle East, where people have spread Western widely. It's because this society is based on settlerism, not just capitalism. It's based on the idea that there was a cross-class phenomenon of settlement and colonization, and that people, it's not just like, well, they made us think. People widely participated in that process. If you go to Oklahoma, the slogan of Oklahoma, the name of the football team, on their license plates, it says the Sooners. Who are the Sooners? The Sooners are the people who jumped the gun on stealing the land of the native people in Oklahoma. Oklahoma was supposed to be, the Indian territory. It was like that's where Huckleberry Finn ran when he had to get away from civilization. But after that, they discovered resources, they discovered land, they wanted it, and they said, okay, we're going to have a land grab, a land drive. We're going to allow you to go out there and stake your claim. The Sooners were the people who left before they were supposed to steal the best land first. And this is their proud claim to identity as Oklahomans, as they were the Sooners. They were the ones who cheated even more than the other thieves.
What was their race? What was the Sooners' race?
What was their heritage? The Sooners.
They're mostly Anglo, Scotch-Irish Presbyterians, the Calvinists, it's who they are.
My great-grandparents, our great-great-grandparents were Sooners, and let's see, German, English, Irish, Polish, they had a lot of different things in them.
Yeah, so that's the question becoming white, because nobody was white before there was an empire, before there was colonialism, before there was conquest. Then they invented this category of white, particularly in the settler colonies, to amalgamate the population of people from all these other things, deracinate them in a sense, and re-racinate them, denationalize them, and say, okay, your loyalty is to this white nation that we're building here. So I can go further, but I'd rather have some discussion and get some people to talk about it. I'll say one other thing. I think that Hawaii, for example, Bill Clinton apologized to Hawaii for stealing Hawaii.
Yes.
Hawaii was an independent country. Nobody denies it. The United States fomented a coup. It was recognized by 73 different countries at the time. The United States fomented a coup. They sent in the Marines to back the coosters, who were the plantation owners who took over.
Missionaries.
They applied for annexation, absorption, annexation. The annexation treaty failed. Every single person in Hawaii, except for the plantation owners and missionaries, signed a petition to the United States government saying, do not annex Hawaii, you have no right to do it. The white supremacists inside the United States Senate did not want to annex Hawaii because they felt it was not white. It was Asian and Polynesian and Melanesian. And so they actually blocked the treaty. They did not get the majority they needed to pass a treaty of annexation. And so the next year they came back and they passed a joint resolution of the House and Senate by a majority and said, okay, Hawaii belongs to the United States. Completely unconstitutional. Alaska, Seward's Folly. Who was Seward? Seward was the Secretary of War under Abraham Lincoln. In the middle of the Civil War,
Secretary of State.
Secretary of State? Okay.
Stanton was war. Go ahead, sorry.
That's right. That's right. In any case,
Anyway,
while the Civil War was going on, the United States was at risk of complete disintegration. Lincoln carried out two major initiatives. One was he sent half his army into the West to protect territory and to launch wars against the indigenous people of the prairies. And the second was he bought he bought Alaska from the Russian Empire because he saw that the Russians were losing their grip, and he did not want to allow the indigenous people of Alaska to control their own destiny. So if you look at the flag is 13 stars, 13 stripes and 50 stars. But not at first. At first it was 13 stars and 13 stripes. And that's because it was the 13 colonies. And now that they've absorbed themselves into a single nation state, then they claim the right to continue to absorb additional lands that have been colonized. So the land that we're on now is native land. It was Mexico, it was indigenous land. And if you look at the history, there was a war in this city. If you go to the Red Line station in Universal Studios, they have the story of Kit Carson and John Fremont, Indian killers, and how they won the Battle of Los Angeles to take this So the reason that's pertinent is that there was just a struggle here not long ago when they built the Plaza de las Artes y Culturas. They discovered it was, you know, indigenous bones right there under the soil of downtown Los Angeles. If we talk about the question of housing, you know, a lot of people struggle around the question of foreclosures. Well, the bank doesn't really have the title because they slice and dice the mortgage and nobody knows who it is. But the fundamental question of title in this country is based on a dispensation of the Pope, who said this is, you know, null territory, doesn't belong to anybody but these savages. Therefore, you can plant the flag, you can carve it up, you can claim it, and you can grant land from the imperial regime of Spain to whoever you wish, and they then own the land. So that whole question of privatization is based on colonialism. A lot of people struggle about corporations and corporatism and corporate control of government. Well, who created a corporation? First corporation was the British East India Corporation, the Hudson's Bay Corporation. Corporation was invented to limit liability. Why? Because no one was capable of financing the project of colonialism. The state issued licenses to say, we're going to limit your liability. You are now incorporated to carry out this project of colonialism, and you can reap all the benefits and share them out among your shareholders. And so the corporation is fundamentally based on that colonial project and continues to this day in that vein. So I'll stop, but I want people to think about what are the implications of this. How do we deal with this? How do we internalize it? How do we struggle in ourselves to decolonize ourselves? Because I'll say one last thing as a person of European descent, very recent, because my father came from Europe. You know, Frantz Fanon talked about black skin, white masks, and he said that a lot of colonized people had been taught through the most brutal repression to identify with their own oppressors and to mask themselves. But what I see is that the situation of white masks applies to people with white skin, quote unquote white skin as well, that people have been denationalized, just ideologically and in other ways incorporated into the system, and that to reclaim our humanity we have to discard those racial and national definitions and struggle for human rights. People object all the time about privilege. I don't have any privilege out of this, but the fact is that if you look at most of the world, there's over 1 billion people live on 50 cents a day, and 3 billion people live on $1 a day. So if that's not your situation, you are privileged. And privileges operate in every sector of society. Inside the prisons, going to do a lot of prison work, the guards will distribute privileges to certain prisoners. Doesn't mean they're not prisoners. It means that privilege is a very effective mechanism of social control. And so anything that you accept as a privilege, do very key things. One is that if you have it as a privilege, you don't have it as a right. It can be taken away at any time. And the reason people give privileges, teachers get privileges, parents get privileges, is to control the children, control the students, control the prisoners, because they're going to take it away if they don't do what they're told. But the second thing is, if you have something by privilege and you think you have it by merit, you're operating on a complete basis of, you're hallucinating. And so there's no way to struggle for a sound method to move forward if you have either of those two things. A lot of white people think that it's like it's magical thinking. It's like, oh, I'm white, nothing's going to happen to me. Not the case. There was a racial panic in Australia after World War II. They thought the Asians were going to invade them, quote unquote, and take over Australia. So they appealed to England for white racial stock. They had to boost the population, the white population of Australia, so they could, avert this demographic catastrophe of too many Asians. So the British took war orphans and sent them to Australia, except they were not orphans. They were the children in group homes because their fathers were in the military or dead, and the mothers were working and could not support the children. They took them all and they moved them en masse to Australia. They were put in religious-run schools, and most of them were abused sexually. They never were given Australian citizenship. That they were, like in 1998 or something, a few dying mothers were finally allowed to reunite with their children in Australia. So the fact that you're white, they don't give a shit about your whiteness. All they want to know is, can they exploit you, and how can they control you, and what's the best way to do it. But if you think that you're hot shit because you're white, then you're in trouble.
Right on.
Anyway, so questions or comments or anything else anyone wants to contribute?
I wanted to comment about what you said earlier. I was watching a documentary the other day, and they said California actually used to be part of Mexico, is what my understanding was. So that we've actually took this land from Mexico, and then we're telling the Mexicans, well, you can't be here. You got to go home. And
They
I'm
are.
like, they're home.
They are.
Yeah.
So that's like
Yeah, the arrogance is amazing.
Santa Ana, Santa Monica, Los
Yep.
Angeles,
Yep.
San Francisco. You know, I mean every.
Yeah, that's where it all came
But
from.
also Mexico itself, we have to understand, it was also an imperial project in its own. It was the viceroy. So it's the indigenous people, the indigenous
Yes.
Mexica and Tarahumara and all, you know, the Apache. And they fought. People fought Spain, they fought Mexico, they fought the United States, and people are still resisting.
There was a war between the U.S. and Mexico in the 1840s, and Mexico had ceded about a third of their territory to the United States. This took place under the presidency of Polk, I believe, and I'm told that one of the people who opposed it was a young congressman by the name of Abraham Lincoln.
So let me actually follow up on that two things. One is that they used the pretext to launch that war. They had already taken part of Texas. They claimed a bigger part of Mexico, and so when Mexico moved some troops around inside Mexico, the United States claimed they had been attacked by the Mexicans, and they launched the war, and then the president went to ask for a declaration of war after the fact because of the hostilities. But the second thing is that although Lincoln opposed the declaration of war, when it came up, he voted in favor of the allocation of funds to support our troops. So this is the classic pattern of every war we've ever seen. The other thing about it is it did lay the basis, the annexation of Texas and none of the rest laid the basis for Hawaii and other territories. But the key thing, people know the story of Henry David Thoreau, right? And Thoreau was a war tax resistant. The tax he was resisting was the tax to pay for the Mexican-American War. He said, I refuse to pay that. Why? Because it's a war to expand slavery. And so slavery was abolished in Mexico when they got their independence. And then they invited people to come live in Mexico. You could emigrate from the United States to Mexico, to Texas, and help develop Mexico if you agreed not to have slaves and to recognize they were part of Mexico. So people went there, and as soon as they got there, they started agitating for independence from Mexico so they could bring their slaves in and have a plantation economy. And so when Thoreau was imprisoned, was it Emerson, Ralph Waldo Emerson went to see him in the prison and said, Henry, what are you doing in there? And Thoreau said, no, Ralph, what are you doing out there?
Yeah, it's a great story, and one thing, at some point you asked the question, how are we going to liberate ourselves from this mentality? I actually think what we have to do is we have to purge it out of us, and it's not a one-time deal. It's a continuous deal, and it will take generations. And I can purge some of it out of me. Will I get all of it out of me? And one of the things I've noticed, I have a lot of kids. And we teach U.S. history in the 5th, the 8th, and the 11th grade. So my kid brings home an 8th grade history book. Now when we had that war with Mexico in 1840, it took us a very short period of time. Winfield Scott lands at Veracruz, marches on Mexico City, lays siege to Mexico City, and they signed a treaty. And by the way, if you actually figured, I think it's closer to half of Mexico they got.
Half, wow.
And Polk was pissed that we didn't get more. He was not happy with that treaty at all. He was really upset with the people that negotiated the treaty.
Let's just take the whole country.
But where I'm going with this is, and that happened in just a couple of months, that whole war.
I want to say two things that I really liked: corporations as a way to fund colonization. I think that slogan really stuck out to me. And privilege as a form of social control, and really effective social control. But so if you believe it's merit or inherent or whatever, you are screwed. Like, you're fucked, because you're going to get sideswiped, especially if you believe in radical politics. But if you can have a consciousness, maybe that would be a way of decolonizing your own, like, decolonizing your own mind, and like trying to say, okay, I recognize that there's probably a colonizer deep down inside of me, but be conscious of that, and then use your privilege for good. Like, I'm a pretty attractive white girl, so I'm going to use this privilege and try and do something, because I won't get stopped. So I think that that's a way of answering that question of what to do.
I want to come with a couple of things more, because I think it's really important. I want to talk about the Mexican War again, and also about the Spanish-American War. The Mexican-American War, Karl Marx, who was a major opponent of slavery and the slave trade, but Marx and Engels actually supported the U.S. conquest of Mexico on the following rationale they put forward. They said that the Yankee capitalists would be more efficient at utilizing the resources of that territory, that they would incorporate the Pacific as a whole into the development of capitalism, and therefore that it would hasten the advent of socialism by creating the material conditions necessary to create a socialist society. I think that's a fundamental flaw at the root of Marxist thinking, and why I'm not a Marxist, although I believe in socialism and anarcho-communism, whatever you want to call it. I think fundamentally there's a Eurocentrism deeply embedded into Marxist thinking that says it's about these forces of production that are accumulated. And even though Marx opposed slavery, he did not see that that was a war to expand slavery. And so I think that was critical, and also that it was about a war of conquest and colonialism. So I think that's something that has to be encouraged from the way we think about socialism and social development. In relation to the Mexican-American War, the Spanish-American War, again, a pretextual war. They created an incident in Havana Harbor, and they launched the war on Spain, because Spain was, at that point, a sick and decaying empire, and they felt they could pick off. So the Spanish-American War was not fought in Spain, not fought in the United States. It was fought in Cuba, Puerto Rico, the Philippines, Guam, and these other Spanish colonies the United States wanted to get. After they conquered Spain, same thing, took control, there was a war for more than 14 years in the Philippines against the indigenous Filipino population, who were fighting guerrilla style, as they've been fighting against Spain.
14 years?
Yes, 14 years. It was longer than the Vietnam War. There was an opposition in the United States. There was something called the U.S. Anti-Imperialist League in 1898 that opposed the Spanish-American War and opposed the genocide that the U.S. was carrying out in the Philippines.
Was Mark Twain part of that?
Yes, Mark Twain, William Dean Howells, and some of the most noted intellectuals today. But they made a fundamental mistake. They said that a continental republic is incompatible with an insular empire. They accepted the idea that the continent was a republic, was something that would be accepted, but the only problem was trying to expand it into Cuba, into Puerto Rico. They did not recognize the imperial nature of this whole social structure. So the point I'm trying to make is that when we try to think about liberation, we try to analyze politics, you have to have an anti-colonial understanding. Otherwise, you're going to come up with flawed strategies and politics that do not succeed. And we can't afford to fail because of all the previous discussion about ecology and capitalism, state of the planet. The third thing is, in terms of what to do, I think it's critical to support the struggles of colonized people for liberation, to engage directly with them, to identify that we have a common enemy, to fight for ourselves, but to fight for humanity, to fight for decolonization. It's important. There is this race trade analysis out there. To me, it's the tail wagging the dog. The way you eliminate whiteness is by eliminating blackness as a mark of slavery, as a mark of oppression. By eliminating colonialism, then you'll decolonize yourself, because there won't be any colonies to be, lording it over. So, supporting the Palestinians, supporting Puerto Rico, engaging in that anti-imperialist struggle I think is vital.
If I could just...
Yeah, I see that in Hawaii. I just happen to be doing. I hope this is not too obnoxious. It's just it's not doing. I do happen to be going to an event that's sponsored and being this. So it's just coincidental. But I do go to Hawaii. I'm going there in 20 days, and they do have a very active native and anti-colonial movement there. I'm hoping to meet up with more of them. And they know their.
I'm gonna archive. I'll be back in 1 minute.